Eventually, you reach an age where you find yourself looking back on your formative years. The distance of time reduces much to uncertainty and noise, while the clarity of hindsight casts other moments into sharp relief. That time you were humiliated in class. That time your friends were there for you. That time you superimposed your head onto Captain Falcon's body. The joys and tragedies of youth. So why am I bringing this up? No reason really. I guess I'm just getting a little introspective now that I've reached my 40s. Anyway, here's a review of Lost Records, a game where you play a 40-something woman reliving her youth. Before I go any further, a quick note about spoilers. Lost Records is a narrative adventure game, meaning a key part of its appeal is its story. With that in mind, all the footage I'm going to show you is from the opening couple of hours of the game and is limited to incidental scenes. I'll also not be covering details of the plot outside of the immediate setup, and some limited discussion of characterization. Nevertheless, if you do want to go in completely blind, I'll just let you know here and now that Lost Records was, by some margin, my game of 2025, and I heartily recommend it. Okay, now that they've gone, for those of you who remained, Lost Records is the latest narrative adventure to come from Dontnod, and when it came out, in early 2025, it was to muted reception. Relatively few outlets covered it, and those that did mostly gave it middling reviews. So why the lack of attention and lack of enthusiasm for the game? Perhaps it was thanks to the game's subject matter. A story about North American teenage girls flavoured with supernatural goings-on could, on the face of it, be seen as a retread of Dontnod's breakout series, Life is Strange. In turn, perhaps thanks to the most recent Life is Strange game being not a highlight of the series, people were less excited at the idea of another like adventure, even though the Life is Strange series has long been out of the hands of Dontnod. Or perhaps, more simply, it was down to the perspective of the game. Rather than simply being a story of teenage rebellion, this is the story of teenage rebellion as viewed through the lens of a middle-aged woman, where the majority of people can easily empathise with the life and trials of being a teenager, having gone through the experience themselves. Fewer have had the experience of reaching their 40s, perhaps making it less relatable to a decent portion of games reviewers, a cohort who do, for the most part, tend to skew young, which has a lot to do with the awful conditions, pressure on and remuneration for that workforce, but that's not a subject for this video. But Yan, I hear you cry. Plenty of games feature middle-aged protagonists. And you'd be right, of course. From Kratos to Joel Miller, Arthur Morgan to Max Payne, there was a period where you couldn't move for sad dads crowding out Metacritic, like it was a Wetherspoons on curry night. But the thing to bear in mind is that these sad dads had guns, of the literal or metaphorical variety. And if there's one thing the game's buying public can relate to, it's blowing away the sources of their sadness with extreme prejudice. By contrast, Swan Holloway, the playable protagonist of Lost Records, is a somewhat awkward woman who decides to treat the source of trauma that is her past by revisiting it with her friends, the group reminiscing on their youth together and trying to piece together blank spots in their memory. The only shooting in this game comes courtesy of the camcorder that young Swan has on her person at all times.
This has been Swan, filming at the Movie Palace on July 7th, 1995. More to come.
Without violent catharsis to fall back on then, we're back to the same appeal as Life is Strange, or indeed most narrative adventure games. The chance to inhabit a character on a journey, to steer a story, and to solve a mystery. This is a game with a lot to say. It's a game about friendship. It's also a game about not fitting in. And it's also a game about the pressures placed on women, particularly young women, particularly in the 90s, and about reacting to those pressures. And it's also a game about how the experiences of your youth shape you and how you keep growing past that point. And it's also about a mystery, about uncanny goings-on and overcoming dangers, both natural and otherwise. That Lost Records manages to weave all these narrative strands together into a coherent pattern is an impressive feat in itself, and one helped by fantastic dialogue from start to finish. Where the original Life is Strange had a few clunkers in its script, notably some hella cringy phrasing, lending the script an unintended "how do you do, fellow kids" quality. The only cringeworthy lines in Lost Records come from the authentically awkward Swan blurting out non sequiturs.
Nora, I'm Autumn. Cool. Nice to meet you, cool. What? You don't want to tell us your name?
No. I mean, yes.
Every character in Lost Records feels like a real person. Take Nora.
I'm Swan.
Nora is introduced as the most stridently punk of the gang of four that the game centres on. She's rude, she's crude, fashion has attitude, and she's the lead singer of a garage punk band. It would be easy for her personality to have been written to match this appearance. The bullish, act first, think last member of the gang who maybe leads the group into situations they'd have been better off avoiding. We've encountered this character a million times before, right? Instead, the game swerves and delivers a materially spoiled, but attention-starved character with a severe streak of cowardice. The game builds her character out into a living, breathing person with all the complexities that entails, making her deeply sympathetic, even as her flaws surface. And that goes for all of the cast. The primary group are outcasts for one reason or another, and I completely bought into that, even as I understood why they ended up coming together as fast friends. The serendipity of meeting other weirdos as a teenager counts for a lot.
I haven't met many weirdos like you.
Thanks.
Where Life is Strange, and yes, I am mentioning Life is Strange a lot because I think it's the point of comparison that most people will have encountered. Where Life is Strange is essentially a game about a superpower, and how it and its side effects help and hinder its protagonist, the supernatural elements of Lost Records are much more in the background. Without spoiling things, they help drive the plot, but in terms of gameplay, you're effectively playing a completely mundane teenager. This grounding also helps make the game into a true ensemble story, despite the fact that you control only a single character. Where Life is Strange did an excellent job of fleshing out protagonist Max, her superpower really does distinguish her from the rest of the cast in a way which makes them feel like bit players. Lost Records, by contrast, made me believe in and care about every one of its coven of teenagers. They can be self-centred, short-sighted, quick-tempered and impotent, but they're also genuine, caring, true to one another and filled with righteous indignation, so well placed that I just had to root for them. More, despite never having been a teenage girl in a rural American town, I found myself empathising with them. They reminded me of the Jan who didn't stand up for himself as a teenager, the Jan who couldn't perform masculinity appropriately and didn't understand why that was a problem, the Jan who would blurt out non sequiturs in an attempt to fit in. And they reminded me of the friends who stood by me, the Jan who finally realised why non-conformity was a problem and rejected that reasoning, the Jan who got sent home from school for kicking off about the hypocrisy of having a minute's silence for the deaths of Americans half a world away when we'd never had a minute's silence for any other major terrorist event. Plus ça change on that front, I guess. And if the game had been only that, had been set entirely in Swan's teenage years, it would have been enough. The game tells a compelling story about characters I care about, and it never loses its focus. But as already mentioned, it doesn't content itself with simply that perspective. By jumping back and forth between the present day of November 2022 and the summer of 95, Lost Records draws direct comparisons between characters with nearly 30 years of remove, demonstrating how the character traits of youth transform with age, the shadows of quirks ironed out by decades of maturing and performing, but still visible to those who know to look. The game is smartly placed so that choices you remember in the past will have impacts on the present that are only revealed to the player later on, and meanwhile your time in the past is complemented with commentary from the present-day characters, offering reflections on the situation that you are playing through at that very moment.
Yeah, guys like Corey only date slutty girls, right? I hate that I said that.
Even though they're extremely different games, it actually reminded me a lot of my favourite point-and-click adventure of all time, LucasArts' Day of the Tentacle. Only where Lost Records uses its time differential to further drive home its narrative, Day of the Tentacle used timey-wimey fun to create complicated cross-time puzzles where you might, e.g., get someone out of a kumquat tree in the future by tricking George Washington into thinking it's a cherry tree in the past so that he cuts it down. You know, normal stuff. Man, I should really replay Day of the Tentacle again. Anyway, Lost Records' approach to time-based character study is almost unheard of in video games, and not only does it help flesh the characters out, it also encouraged me to look at myself, consider how I've changed and how I've not over the years. Always a rare pleasure when a game triggers a bit of introspection. This unique narrative perspective is also reflected in the game's visual perspective. When we start the game, we are viewing the world from adult Swan's first-person perspective, stuck on an interminable phone call with a parent who wants to know when she's next visiting, Now that's relatable content. When we flash back to Swan's youth, however, we switch to a third-person perspective, and this visual treatment repeats throughout the game, reminding us of who we are and who we are remembering at any given moment. It's a smart, effective design decision that really helps the player internalise the situation. It also leans into the relative emotional maturity of the characters. The third-person perspective of the past lets us see Swan's responses to challenging situations, whereas the adult Swan, better able to mask her emotions, is thus masked from us, while we get to look her harder-to-read adult friends directly in the eye as they speak, much more necessary to understand their true emotions than it would be for their teenage selves. And on the subject of looking characters in the eye, while the animation and lip sync are obviously constrained by budget compared to, say, a game from the Naughty Dog minds, the direction, character modelling, and voice acting is utterly on point, making each conversation completely convincing.
Oh, you're such a liar. But I'll let it slide. No, really, you do.
It helps that this isn't a game which subscribes to the Hollywood aesthetic which so many others commit to. Dialogue is allowed to be awkward and awkwardly timed rather than snappy and quippy. Characters are allowed to look like everyday humans rather than supermodels. Yes, even the women. Demonstrating a variety of body types, enjoying skin types beyond perfectly smooth, and even getting to visibly age beyond their 20s. I don't know about you, but I find it a lot easier to relate to characters when they look like people I might actually meet in real life. Honestly, I could leave the review there. As a narrative adventure, it's the story and characters which are essential to it, and it completely nails both aspects. I'm not going to talk in any more detail about its qualities on that front, but suffice it to say I was gripped from start to finish. But I ought to touch on some of the surrounding aspects of the game, some of which are unqualified successes, while others, they need a little more qualification. First, the highs. The game does a fantastic job of evoking the mid-90s, without going full Stranger Things and fetishizing every element of the era. Swan has a few things I'd expect any self-respecting teen of the time to have had. After all, I certainly did. A knockoff Tamagotchi, some truly hideous troller-likes, and more magic eye pictures than can be healthy. But the game doesn't lean into that for its inspiration. Instead, the setting is evoked more by the fashion, the speech, the technology in evidence. That sense of time is ably assisted by the pitch-perfect soundtrack, mixing licensed bangers from the era. Viewer, believe me when I tell you that the nostalgia punch I felt when a Cocteau Twins track drifted in from an in-world speaker was staggering. That is blended with a gorgeous, evocative background soundtrack, plus one fabulous era-appropriate in-world track made for the game by the excellent Nora Kelly band, here dipping into their punk roots rather than the country music they're better known for. In fact, as an aesthetic package, the game is a complete success. Dontnod focused their resources on making a handful of small, perfectly realised environments to explore, and it pays off. The game is evocative and frequently beautiful, even as it unflinchingly realises a small town well on the decline, and it practically asks the player to take snapshots of it. Which brings us to a slightly less successful aspect of the game. It doesn't just practically ask you to record things, it literally asks you to do so, requiring that Swan records X amount of things in certain scenes on her camcorder in order to progress the story. As a gameplay mechanic, this is a neat idea and did indeed get me to stop and smell the roses more than I might have, which is to the good. The optional recordings the game sets you, such as recording a set number of wild animals over the course of the game, also adds a compelling little gotta snap 'em all activity to the game, which genuinely adds a lot of fun to the mix. The camcorder itself produces some enjoyably grungy footage, and having characters respond to having a camera stuck in their face is frequently amusing. But the mechanic falls just shy of a perfect landing thanks to some clunky implementation. This comes down to two things. The aforementioned reactions to the camera are great when they come off, but unfortunately they will routinely trigger slightly out of time or mid-background conversation without fitting in at all, leading to a break in suspension of disbelief as the scene's naturalism falls apart. Secondly, while the little clips you record can be fun, they are frustratingly short, limited to a handful of seconds per clip. You'll get plenty of shots where a response animation, and or Swan's commentary on it, will last longer than you can actually record for. This in turn makes the secondary aspect of video making, where you get to arrange your clips into a single video, frustratingly limited as the tiny clips and the limited number you can use per video prevent you from ever putting together a proper, obsessed teenager level collage. This is obviously a technical limitation, presumably to stop players from wiping out their storage space, but it's a real shame there's no way around it. The camcorder also comes to the fore in the game's infrequent puzzle sections. These puzzles are generally short, simple, and sweet, and help punctuate the story with some gentle brain teasing. There's not a great deal of friction to the game, which would be a problem if this were meant to be a puzzle game, but in a game like this, it's the perfect choice. There is one less good pseudo-stealth sequence in the game, but it's mercifully short and very straightforward. And honestly, that's about it as far as my criticisms go. I did hit a couple of very minor bugs in my playthroughs of the game. Some visual glitching with a specific character's hair and one bit where I got stuck on some geometry. But nothing to write home about, and certainly nothing which actually spoiled the experience for me. And that's the game, really. It has a couple of rough edges, but my goodness, I'd rather have a game like this, pushing out all the stops to tell the best story it can from a unique perspective, rather than a game that's nothing more than a well-polished veneer. Lost Records is a beautiful, emotional, thought-provoking game, and I hope many more people get to enjoy it. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of this video. It was a pretty long one, which it probably deserved to be, given it's been 8 years since my last video. Hopefully my next one will be a little sooner. Feel free to like and subscribe and all that. Who knows, maybe the next notification will be within a few months rather than, years. Mostly I hope you enjoyed the video, and I really hope you enjoyed Lost Records. I think it's a great game, evidently, and I hope this video encourages a few people to play it who might not otherwise have. If only so I've got more people to talk about the game with. Anyway, until next time, ciao!